Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today we're going to be doing some meta predictions for Toronto Regionals this weekend. Of course, Toronto Regionals is this weekend, and I'm super excited. I, of course, will be in attendance. I am from Toronto, and I can't wait to see what is brought to the table. Of course, it feels right now with the meta, you can play almost anything and do well with it. It really does feel like we are in a super diverse meta, and I've got my predictions here for what I think will happen at Toronto Regionals, what decks will do well, what decks to expect, if a deck is good, or whatever prediction I got is going to be here in today's video. Let me know what you think will happen in Toronto. What do you think the best deck for Toronto is? What deck do you think will win the tournament and all that good stuff? What decks could get top 8? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below and leave a like in the video if we're going to enjoy. And let me know if you're also going to be at Toronto this weekend so I can come up and, maybe say hi to some people and all that good stuff. And let's start things off with, I think, the deck that will be the most popular, and that is going to be the Lostbox deck. I think Turbo Lostbox is really good for this tournament. I think with the popularity of Miraidon heading into Toronto, I think that'll be a big deal for Turbo. Turbo just seems like a very solid deck. If you're good with Turbo, I would say just play it. I think it's a very solid deck right now. I think that it's definitely in a spot that most decks aren't really in. It doesn't feel like it's shaky or anything. It just feels like it's a perfectly good deck to play. And if you're good with Turbo, definitely play it. However, I think that Kyogre might actually be the best way to play Lost Box right now. So, personally, if I were going to Toronto and I were able to play Kyogre, personally, I can't play Kyogre to regionals. I couldn't do it, man. 9 rounds, I would not be able to do it. I probably wouldn't have the mental capacity to do that. So, going to Toronto, I am not playing Kyogre. However, had I had the ability to pilot this deck in a regional, I probably would play Kyogre. I think this deck is actually that good for this tournament. I think Miraidon is going to be extremely popular in Toronto. I think we're going to see a lot of Lugia, and I think Kyogre is going to be very good against those matchups, specifically the Miraidon matchup. And I know there's a lot of Miraidon players in the GTA, the greater Toronto area, and a lot of players in Ohio that like Miraidon too. Combine those two together, and you got yourself a good reason to play Kyogre. The problem with Kyogre, though, is it's not a deck that anyone can just pick up and do well with. It's a very hard deck to play, so I think that it definitely will be a deck that we probably will see the top players on, and I don't think it's going to have, we're not going to see, a bunch of Kyogre in day 2, because it is a hard deck to play. I think a lot of top players are going to play Kyogre again, and I do think it is in a great spot. I personally think the Dragonite build here is probably the better way to play it, just because it has a better colorless Lugia matchup. The Sam Kyogre deck is also fine. The Raymond Long winning deck also isn't terrible. It does obviously have some advantages. It does have that good Miraidon matchup, even better than the the Turbo one with the Dragonite and the Raikou, but of course, the Raymond Long build is still fine. It does have a bit of an awkward colorless Lugia matchup, right? And that's one of the things that would say, I don't know if this is the best play for this tournament, but yeah, Lost Box Kyogre Zam isn't bad at all. I think either build of Kyogre could do fine, though personally, if I were playing Kyogre, I would probably still play the Dragonite build, but I think both builds of Kyogre are honestly perfectly fine and good right now, and I think it definitely has a good chance of being the best deck for this tournament, if not the best deck. I would 100% play Kyogre if I really could for Toronto, but I'm not, unfortunately. Miraidon might not be the best deck in the room, but I think it's going to be the most popular, or one of the most popular deck in the room. A lot of people love their Miraidon right now. It's very, casual player friendly deck, right? It's pretty easy to play. It cheeses wins. A lot of the time, this deck doesn't win because the player's good. It wins because you cheese a donk or you cheese a path or something. But Miraidon will be popular. It's a strong deck still. Despite it having, obviously, some flaws, I think it's still a pretty strong deck. And despite it maybe not being one of the best decks in the format, I think that it is going to be one of the most popular decks at the tournament. Because Toronto obviously is going to have a lot of newer players, and I think some of them are going to just pilot Miraidon because it's a very easy deck to pilot if you're new to the game, in my opinion. And I think it's going to be a popular deck, despite not being one of the best decks, not even top 5, I think, but definitely being, still a popular deck for Toronto. I'm not playing Miraidon personally. I couldn't do it, man. I couldn't do it. You couldn't do it with a 10-foot pole. Now, Lugia is definitely another deck that I think will be popular. It is coming off of a huge win in Sacramento. Obviously, it didn't win Lille Regionals, but you got to remember, the European format stuff is it's different than what we got going on. I mean, obviously, it's the same format, but it's just different tastes and different styles of how people play. There's a reason why we see more control in Europe and than we do in, over here in America. Though Lugia is going to be popular, it's another pretty, easy deck to play. Though I would argue that Lugia, especially colorless Lugia, and I mean even single strike to a degree, they do have a lot of little intricate plays you do. There is a bit of thinking, but Lugia is just another very simple, straightforward deck, and I think colorless Lugia is still the best way to play Lugia right now. It's got the best Lost Box matchup, and it also is pretty good against Charizard, which is one of the things that scares me about playing a single strike Lugia deck, is the Charizard matchup seems a little shaky, whereas colorless Lugia isn't as bad into Charizard. And obviously, the big appeal is just the Snorlax is being so good right now against Lostbox, and that's going to be a big reason why we might see Color Lugia. The one thing I don't like about Color Lugia is now that people are taking Spiritomb in their Lostbox decks, you can't KO the Dragonite as easily with Weird Ear anymore, and that actually could cause some issues. So I definitely think that's one thing you want to keep your eye out on, is how that will affect the matchup. Obviously, you can like use Mew to KO the Dragonite, but then you got to remember you're also damaging your bench for Sableye, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But I do think Color Lugia is still a very strong deck and another mostly popular deck that I think we'll see in Toronto. I do think we will see some Guardi. Guardi is just one of those decks where if a good player, plays it, it's going to do well. I think it definitely is like kind of like Kyogre. It's a deck that I think only like the top level players are going to do well with because it is a deck that's hard to play. You have to play it fast. Like personally, if I'm playing against somebody who's playing Gardevoir and I can tell they're taking a long time, not on purpose, because obviously there's a whole controversial debate right now with Gardevoir, I would tell my opponent to play faster. Just saying. But yeah, Gardevoir, I think, is a deck that, again, just the high-level players will play and do well with, whereas people who maybe don't know how to play Guardi as well will probably not do as well with because they'll get a lot of ties or whatever happens. But Guardi's still a fine deck. I think it's still, like, pretty well positioned in the format right now. I really do like the collapsed build, the workers. Spiritomb is also becoming a staple right now in Guardi. It helps against Color Lugia, obviously helps against Mew. So, yeah, Guardi seems pretty good still, and I think we'll still maybe see a Guardian top 8 in this tournament. Shampoo's also a deck that's been getting a lot of attention right now. It did get top 4 in Lille, and it has been getting some decent placements here and there in those regionals, and it's a very straightforward, well, not a straightforward deck, well, it kind of is, but it is kind of hard to play. It is hard to sequence this deck anyways, or it does take a lot of thinking with sequencing, but Shampoo's another deck that I think is pretty popular. It's got its stands. It's one of those decks that has stands, people will play it because it's Shampoo. It's a cool Pokemon. It's a cool deck, too, and honestly, it's still pretty good for Toronto. I don't think it's getting worse. Well, arguably with the amount of Judge Path and maybe even Miraidon, that could be the one issue with playing Shampoo this weekend, but it doesn't seem like a terrible play at all, and I think there will still be some Shampoo this weekend that will do well. Obviously, we got to talk about Mew. So Mew did win Lille Regionals, but the build that won was not the double turbo build that we saw from Peoria. It was actually the fusion build with Meloetta and Ice Cube, which is a build we haven't really seen do well in a while, especially since Charizard has come out. It feels that the Grabber double turbo build is better against Charizard, whereas the fusion build is better against Spiritomb, but worse against Charizard. I don't know. Honestly, Mew is a really hard deck to predict. I think Spiritomb is still going to be popular this weekend. Personally, I wouldn't play Double Turbo Mew. I think there's too much Spiritomb. Fusion Mew isn't bad. I do think that Charizard's actually slipping a little bit in popularity, which is a good thing for Fusion Mew, in my opinion. So I could definitely see Fusion Mew doing well. I don't know if it's the best way to play Mew right now. It probably has to be, because I think there's just too much Spiritomb right now for something like Double Turbo Mew to do well. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if someone had a deep problem with Fusion Mew. Maybe not top 8. Like, I don't think we'll see Mew in top 8 again, but there might be a couple Mews that, maybe at like top 16 or something. Double Turbo Mew, I do think is slightly worse right now. I think it's a cool deck in a meta where nobody plays Tomb, but now that it's popular, it's got people's attention. I think that it's obviously going to get a bit weaker, and I don't think we're going to see Double Turbo Mew do as well. Yeah, I did get top 8 in Lille, but I just don't think Double Turbo Mew is the best play for Toronto, because I still think there's too much Spiritomb running around right now. But somebody will play it. I'm sure we'll see a couple Double Turbo Mews in day 2. It's still not a bad deck by any means, but it's just with how popular Spiritomb is, it's a little bit of a riskier play. Charizard is kind of not falling off, but slipping a little bit in popularity. I think the deck is like pretty like average and solid. Like, it's a pretty like solid deck, though I do think it has a bit of an awkward Lost Zone matchup. Obviously, it's a big deal. Its Miraidon matchup might be, shaky depending on how much Judge Path. It really can depend on how much Judge Path we're going to see, especially now that Giratina might start getting a bit more popular. Not to mention Arc Piles are starting to come out with the Judge Path combo, and ultimately those are all things Charizard does not like to see. I think Charizard is like a perfectly fine deck, though. I don't think it's the best deck for Toronto. I don't think it's the worst deck. It's just somewhere maybe not even in the middle, like maybe below top 5. It's like a fine deck, right? It's very fine. I don't know. I think people will play it because it's also just Charizard, not because the deck is good. I just literally, because it's just Charizard. People like Charizard, and that's going to be a reason why we might see a bit of Charizard this weekend. I don't know. It feels like a very average deck right now. It's not bad. It's not great either. It's perfectly fine. Yeah, that's kind of my take on Charizard. Arvinzard, I still think, by the way, is the best way to play Charizard. It seems the one that's getting the highest placements, doing the best. It definitely seems Arvinzard is the way to play it right now. Giratina is kind of coming back slightly. It has been falling off recently, but now it's starting to maybe come back into the format. It did get top 8 in Lille, and I think that this build is actually pretty unique. Just playing the 4 Switch card, the 4 Gen Energy, and playing a little bit heavier of supporters. I like this. I like Giratina. I like this build. I don't like Giratina. I'm not a fan of the deck personally, but I do like this build is what I meant to say. But yeah, Giratina is like kind of coming back. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a little bit of a better performance this time for Giratina compared to what we saw over in Peoria and Sacramento for sure. Feels like it has a chance to kind of come back. It is scary though with all the colorless Lugia running around, but I don't know. Giratina seems like a perfectly fine deck. If Arc Piles are going to start coming back, why not bring back the Tina too? That's the other thing, right? So I think Tina is like pretty decent right now. Maybe we might see a little bit of a resurgence. I think its placement is going to get better. Rapid Strike's another deck that I think people don't really think of right now, but I think Rapid Strike's also not a bad play for Toronto. You do have like maybe an okay Miraidon matchup. You have the Bears, and then obviously with how popular and strong Lost Zone decks are right now, you have access to the Inteleon. And I think that's one of the things when you play Rapid Strike right now is that Lost Zone matchup seems pretty darn good, and that is a very appealing reason to want to pilot Rapid Strike. I would not be surprised if we did see a Rapid Strike deck do well in Toronto. I think there's going to be a lot of big players on Lost Zone. I think in general, Lost Zone will be popular. And then obviously, I think stuff like Guardi will still be out there. Yeah, I think it's decent. And Muse, like, I don't think Muse is like the greatest deck right now. Like I said, it's very shaky, and that's a good thing for Rapid Strike. Yeah, Rapid Strike's decent. I think it's a perfectly fine deck, and I think somebody's going to have a deep run. It is a deck that will probably keep having deep runs no matter what, but I feel like now, it's a good time to play Rapid Strike, just due to how popular its good matchups are right now. And with the decline of stuff like Mew, it gets even better. And also, Arc Piles, they're not bad matchups either, because you do have the Urshifu to KO Arceus. It's really hard for Arc Piles to win if you can like KO their Arceuses very easily with Urshifu, especially before they get to attack. Goodra got top 8 in Lille. Goodra won in seniors over in Peoria or Sacramento, I think. So yeah, this deck is clearly on the come up right now. Now, Goodra does seem like a bit of a sleeper deck. I don't think it's also the greatest deck on the planet. It definitely is cool. It's got some cool matchups. It's not a bad deck. Some players don't really, like, I would say the average player doesn't know how to play against Goodra properly, in my opinion. It is a deck that if you know what you're doing, you can probably beat it. But if you're somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing, I think this deck can obviously be a bit of a headache. I think it is a strong play for Toronto, in my opinion. It's got good matchups. It's a fine deck. It's, a decent deck to kind of beat the average player with. And it's also a strong deck. Now, will it get top 8 again? Probably not. It's not the worst play for Toronto, like I said. It's a fairly strongish play. Not the worst. Maybe this might be a better day 1 deck, actually, than a better day 2 deck. That actually might be the better take on Goodra. It's a better day 1 than day 2 deck. But it's Goodra at the end of the day. It's a cool deck, and we like seeing cool decks do well. Bit of a sleeper deck. I don't even know if we're going to see a huge name on the deck this time, but I wouldn't be surprised if one snuck in to day 2. Now, Single Strike Lugia seems like the weaker build of Lugia, though I still think this deck is underrated at the moment. Its Charizard matchup is a little shaky. You do have the Cobalion, which does help it a little bit, but the matchup isn't perfect. I do think Single Strike Lugia is still fine, though. I mean, it is nice to have a deck like this in the format where it sets up, it's insane. This deck has basically this deck, in my opinion, has a better chance of setting up more aggressive plays than Colorless Lugia, right? Colorless Lugia doesn't really have that, it doesn't have Tyranitar, it doesn't have, the Stone Journer, it doesn't have these, big, bulky basics that do a lot of damage, hit relevant weaknesses, where something like Colorless Lugia, it's the best it has, Weird Ear, but Weird Ear is starting to get countered more heavily now with the Spirit Tomb being played. So I think Single Strike could have a good run again. I think it's a decent play for Toronto. I like it. I think it's cool. It is obviously maybe a bit worse than Colorless into some matchups. Again, that Zard matchup's very shaky. I will say, though, Single Strike's matchup against Miraidon is slightly better than Colorless Lugia's matchup against Miraidon, which is also kind of an appealing reason to play Single Strike. Now, Arc Piles, baby. We got to talk about the Arc Piles. Arc Piles are starting to come back. The one that I think is the most prominent right now is the Arceus Duraludon Mawile deck that Braden Elford used. I think this deck is kind of sick. I mean, Duraludon seems good right now with how much Lugia there is. I don't think Lugia is going to counter Duraludon that easily. I don't think Lugia should counter Duraludon. If I'm playing Lugia, I'm not playing a counter to Dura, because it's I'm not going to hit. Dura's not going to be that popular is what I'm trying to say. But we could see Arc Dura Mawile doing well. It's a deck that seems like it hits the right matchups, does well. It's pretty good. The Mawile's pretty good. I don't think Gardevoir is going to tech for Mawile at all this weekend. I can't see that happening. So even just Mawile in general, not even just Arc Dura Mawile, just Mawile in general could be something that could do well this weekend. Yeah, Arc Dura Mawile seems cool. It did get top 8 in seniors in Lille regionals. Also, that's something I wanted to point out too. Their Gyarados deck's kind of cool. I want this deck to be good. I think there might be too much Miraidon for a deck like this to do well, but it's still cool. And I mean, I think an Arc Gyarados deck did get day 2 in Lille regionals. It was a bit of a different list, but it was kind of the same concept, right? So it's the same thing. I don't know. I like the Arc Gyarados pile deck. Gyarados seems sketchy, though, with how much Miraidon we'll see. It seems like it might just be a dead card in your deck half the time because of how popular Miraidon will be. but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe an Arc Gyarados deck did do well. Somebody might bring it again. It's a cool deck. It also seems like a pretty strong like Judge Path style deck, right? So just got to make sure you can beat Miraidon at the end of the day. Now, Zard Pidgeot is also kind of the other Zard deck people like to play right now. Zard, I think, is the best and most popular way to play Charizard, but it looks like Zard is still fine. I mean, yeah, there's players that just like this. I mean, people who just kind of pilot Charizard just because they like it will probably be playing this over maybe even Zard, because this deck is a bit easier to play. You do have, obviously, Starbirth, which is really, really good when you're trying to set up Charizards. Yeah, I think Zard and Zard are going to be the two most played Charizard decks. Zard will be more played, but Zard will probably have a couple day 2 placements for sure in Toronto. Artina God day 2 in Sacramento. I'm not sure if this deck is that good right now. I think it's a cool deck to play, but I don't know how good it is. I mean, the Lugia matchup doesn't seem great. Miraidon matchup might not be great either. I don't know. I'm not sold on this deck. I don't know if it does anything better than any of the other Judge Path decks right now. But Arctina does obviously have the power of Giratina, which can do a lot of damage. I don't know. I'm not sold on this deck at the moment. I don't think it's the greatest deck ever, but Arctina to get a couple day 2s in sacks, so maybe some people will kind of pick up on that and play it themselves. Might see an Arctina in day 2. Lost Zone Radiant Charizard is a deck I think is honestly a lot of fun to play. This is definitely a deck that it's kind of the sleeper Lost Zone box deck, obviously. It seems like the one nobody really respects, but probably should because it isn't that bad of a deck. And with how popular stuff like Miraidon and Lugia might be this weekend, it definitely doesn't seem like a terrible play. Well, the single strike Lugia is better than the close matchup. But you get my point, right? Like, this deck doesn't seem like a terrible play for Toronto at all. With how much Miraidon you'll be seeing, I'm sure this deck could put in some work. And obviously, the Charizard is really strong. It's a sleeper deck for sure. It's one of those sleeper Lostbox decks. I think still is as good as even Turbo can be sometimes. Zard is another oddball deck that just keeps getting these random placements. Some people will say this is actually the best way to play Charizard. Well, some people say it's just mid. We keep seeing Lost Zone Charizard day 2. I think we'll see the same thing happen again. I don't think we'll see it in like top 8 or anything, but we'll maybe see at least 1 or 2 Lost Zone Charizards in day 2 in Toronto because there are players that will say this is actually the best way to play Charizard right now. I don't think it is, but it's fine enough. Zard's falling off quite a bit since it's kind of peak. I feel like it's not being played anymore, but it's another Charizard deck that could get day 2. Just somebody might play it and do well with it and get day 2 with it. It definitely can happen. And it doesn't seem like a terrible deck either. Obviously, your Lost Zone matchup might be a little shaky, but it doesn't really seem like a bad deck at all. Control is in an interesting spot. So, Control didn't do that great in Sacramento, but it actually did do decent in Lille. Now, Europe does like to play Control more than we do, and they have better placements than we do with Control overall. But I do think that the Control deck has potential. Now that we've kind of seen it do well in Lille, maybe some of the Control players will pick up on it and pilot it to Toronto, and we might even see Control get day 2 in Toronto this time. Or I don't know if we can have a deep run. I don't think Control can ever win a regional or get top, maybe even not even top 8 in a regional. But Control doing well in a regional definitely could happen, and I could see it happening this weekend. Now that we've seen Control do well in Lille, these lists could be the ideal way to play Control heading into Toronto, and that obviously could be a good thing for Control players that will be in attendance at Toronto. So maybe we'll see a Control deck do well. Who knows? It could happen. I could see it happening. We'll have to see if it does. But it does seem like Control might be picking up a bit more steam after that Lille run. Speaking of Lille, I think the bayet deck's really cool. This is a deck that's getting a lot of hype right now. Whether that hype actually translates to people playing it and the deck doing well is decided or not. My bold prediction is I want to see a bayet deck in day 2 again. I want to see another one in day 2. I even want to see 2 in day 2 if it's possible. Maybe people will pick up on the list. I don't know if it can get refined. The person who played the deck, Mateus, actually put out a pretty good in-depth discussion on their Twitter about the deck and stuff in the replies on their posts. So I think that you kind of already get the gist of what the deck tries to do, how its matchups play out, and all that stuff. I don't know if tweaks or improvements can be made, to be honest, how Mateus worded everything, but we'll definitely, I'm interested on this deck. I want to keep my eye on this deck this weekend. It's a really cool deck. Obviously, I'm not going to play it personally, but this is a really cool deck. It does take a lot of skill to pilot. It's a little bit harder to play, but it is a really cool archetype nonetheless, and I am rooting for somebody to pilot this to a day 2 at Toronto. I think it could happen, man, just saying. Another Arc pile that seems to be kind of cool is Arc Vulpix Pikachu. Vulpix seems nice right now against Charizard and against Shenpao. The Pikachu could be good against Lugia. The thing that scares me about Lugia, though, is if they're playing the Lux, right, the Flying Pikachu immediately becomes worse. But, yeah, Arc pile with Pikachu Vulpix might be okay. Maybe we'll see a Vulpix in day 2. It's possible. I don't really... I mean, the thing is, I guess Gardevoir now plays Spiritomb, which is a little sketchy, so that is one issue, I guess, Vulpix faces. Argoo's another deck that, seems to have these random day 2s out of nowhere. It did have a day 2 in Sacramento. Could be another deck that could do, get day 2 again. Again, maybe not top 8, but maybe a random day 2. Just another random Arc pile that might just get day 2 is our Goodra, right? It's it's Goodra, like I said in my Lost Goodra explanation port. And then finally, I want to talk about the Zork deck that got day 2 in Sacramento. This deck actually seems better than I think a lot of people really gave it credit for. It's strong, it hits hard, it does actually a good amount of damage, and actually hits the right amount of damage under the right circumstances. I think Zork V-Star could do okay. I think maybe somebody might play it again another day 2 with it. It's not a deck that'll be popular, but again, it's another random deck somebody gets day 2 with. It again, like I said, it seems like it's a better deck than people really do give it credit for. But there you go. Those are my predictions for Toronto. There were a lot of decks to talk about because just how diverse the meta is right now. My prediction of what might win the tournament, I mean, like I said, I think Kyogre is the play for Toronto. If you can play it, I would 100% have played it. I think we might see Kyogre win. At least a Lost Zone deck might win Toronto. I think we'll see at least one Lugia in top 8. A Miraidon might get top 8 because of how popular it's going to be. At least one might have to convert to top 8. Guardi will be in top 8 probably too, at least one. Maybe we'll see a Mew in top 8. Probably not, though. Shenpao might get top 8 again. I think there's a lot of cool and devoted Shenpao fans out there, so Shenpao might get top 8. I could see that, so I think the deck that has a high chance of winning will most likely be a Lost Zone deck, specifically Kyogre variant of Lostbox. We'll have to see, though, how it all goes, but I'm excited for this weekend. I still am figuring out kind of the deciding factors, what I'm playing. I'm nailing it down to a couple of decks right now, and I'm excited for Toronto. I think it's going to be a blast. I'm excited to see what decks do well, and hopefully everything goes well in Toronto for me. I'm hoping to get another day 2. We'll see how it all goes. But yeah, let me know if you're going to Toronto down in the comments below. Obviously, don't say what you're playing. Just don't do that. It's not a good idea. But hopefully I can meet some of y'all in Toronto. Yeah, what do you think is going to do well in Toronto? What do you think can win Toronto and all the good stuff? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you on another video. Bye-bye.